Hello, this is Ruslan Belov. We're continuing to examine the situation on the front. Let's open the map. So friends, the 3-day ceasefire has officially ended. Although, as we mentioned in yesterday's episode, in some areas it was over within just a day of starting, and in others it didn't even begin at all. Nevertheless, today, May 11th, artillery is once again thundering across all sectors of the front. Airstrikes have resumed, attack drones are flying. In short, the front has come back to life. Meanwhile, even yesterday, before the ceasefire officially ended, the armed forces of Ukraine launched an assault on another section of the Kursk region. Yes, indeed, their stubbornness could rival that of rams. For 6 days, they battered the village of Tyotkino, and in the end managed only to enter the very edge of the village, where they got bogged down in heavy fighting. We covered this area in detail yesterday. Nothing has changed since then, so I won't repeat myself. They also spent those same 6 days trying to break through our defensive line near the village of Novi Put. But here, it's a total zero. They couldn't even cross the border. In the process, they lost at least 5 IFVs, several APCs, a number of MRAPs, demining vehicles, and a bunch of troops on quad bikes. Apparently realizing that this direction holds no promise whatsoever, yesterday the Ukrainian armed forces decided to probe another section of the front. Right here, from the Sumy area, the village of Besolovka, toward our village of Zarya. There were 2 assaults from the Ukrainian side yesterday. First, around noon, they advanced on 2 armored vehicles, supported by a tank. The border here, as you can see from the map, is barely 100 meters away. But even that, they failed to cross. The tank was hit by an FPV drone just as it left the village, and artillery struck the armored vehicles. One of them managed to turn around and retreat back to Besolovka, hiding in the residential area. The second one burned up along with the Ukrainian soldiers inside. But one attempt clearly wasn't enough for them, so they launched a second attack closer to evening. This time, without heavy equipment, without armor, just motorcycles and quad bikes. They actually reached our defensive line and even tried to break into Zarya, but our forces were ready. One quad bike hit a mine, and the others were destroyed by our FPV drone operators. Right here, on the approaches to the village. In the end, they failed to break through into Zarya. So after 6 days of offensive actions, all they achieved was reaching the edge of Tyotkino village, and at the cost of colossal losses. That's just what was caught on camera. So the question is, if we saw this much on footage, then what are the real Ukrainian losses in this latest adventure into the Kursk region? I'll tell you, hundreds. Hundreds of soldiers were lost here. A video has surfaced online showing a captured Ukrainian soldier. And of course, the first thing he says is, "Don't kill me, my father is Russian." Well, you want to ask, then why are you fighting against Russians? All right, let's move on to other parts of the front. Now let's turn to another area of the front. There's at least one place where fighting never stopped during the ceasefire, and where we've had rather serious success. But we'll get to that a bit later. Right now, let's go to the Kharkov region. News has emerged of our unexpected breakthrough near the town of Volchansk. Why unexpected? Because those who regularly follow the updates know that this front has been stagnant for months, and soon it'll be years. And suddenly, there's activity. In fact, it started even before the ceasefire began. The information just reached us now. So, what happened here? We managed to finish clearing the village of Tikoye and, attention, to cross the Volchia River and break into the settlement of Volchanskia Khutora. I'll tell you this, the event is undoubtedly significant and impressive, especially considering that a river crossing operation had to be conducted. Of course, we shouldn't assume that things here will now progress as rapidly as they did in the Toretsk direction, quickly capturing villages and moving forward. First of all, the settlement is fairly large, and secondly, it's directly connected to Volchansk, specifically to the part still controlled by the Ukrainian armed forces. And what does that mean? It means that at any moment they can transfer reinforcements from the city, and honestly, I believe they've already done that during the 3-day ceasefire. They've already brought in reserves to avoid a major collapse in this area. Still, the fact that there are any movements here, or more precisely even here, on what's been a completely stagnant section of the front, says a lot. But the real collapse of the Ukrainian armed forces is happening much farther south, in the areas of Konstantinovka, Toretsk, Pokrovsk, and Bogoteer. We won't talk about every single location right now. Let's give the army a day or so to get concrete, confirmed results. But for example, early this morning I received information that after the end of the ceasefire, active combat resumed in this pocket, and there has already been forward movement. Specifically, from the direction of Novoalyonovka, certain assault groups managed to advance 4 kilometers and enter the village of Yablonevka. At the moment, I don't have confirmation on whether we've managed to hold positions there. That's why I'm saying, let's wait until tomorrow so we can work with verified data. But of course, I hope the guys succeed. If we manage to take Yablonevka, then it's just one push further, and that's it. You can see it on the map. A large area will fall into full encirclement, and that would have massive consequences for this entire section of the front near Konstantinovka. So we're watching this closely. Now, a section where I can already talk about successful advances. Yesterday, we saw great progress in the area around Bogoteer. Take a look, it's quite something. The entire territory to the east is now under our full control after the Ukrainian armed forces were pushed out of 3 large strongholds at the entrance to Bogoteer. That's roughly 10 square kilometers, just like that. So even though the ceasefire was still officially in effect yesterday, our army still gained ground, 10 square kilometers. And farther south we also moved forward a bit, about 700 meters, though across a fairly wide front. And overall, fighting in Bogoteer itself hasn't stopped for even a day. Both the southern and eastern parts of the village are now fully under our control. According to Ukrainian military experts, I emphasize Ukrainian, not ours, we currently control about a third of the entire village of Bogoteer. We're exerting massive pressure and the Ukrainian forces are struggling. They're gradually retreating toward the western edge, slowly but surely falling back. And people still ask why Zelensky suddenly started asking for a 30 to 60-day ceasefire. Well, because the front is clearly weakening. It's not a collapse, yet. But the setbacks are serious, and the spring-summer offensive has only just begun. The Ukrainian military already needs reinforcement, especially near Konstantinovka. Should they be given that kind of breather? That's a rhetorical question, because Putin already answered it yesterday. Putin, of course, rejected the European proposal for a 30-day pause for the Ukrainian forces. Even if talks begin in Istanbul, you understand that Kyiv is not a reliable negotiating partner. That's why hostilities are ongoing, and they will continue. The Kremlin's negotiation process with the Trump administration is in its final stages, which could lead to a summit between Russian and American leaders, unless positions fall apart or globalists stage provocations. Meanwhile, Dmitry Peskov made a statement about the possible ceasefire. Russia openly says that a 30-day ceasefire benefits Ukraine by giving it a break from Russian strikes, allowing it to rearm and mobilize. So why would Russia agree to that? Still, Peskov didn't completely rule it out. This suggests that Russia wants something in return. Putin is doing everything possible to resolve the conflict in Ukraine, Peskov said, but Kyiv is trying to avoid negotiations. He emphasized that for a ceasefire to happen, the West must stop supplying arms to Kyiv. Ukrainian authorities are not ready to begin negotiations immediately. Russia needs to see a certain dynamic on the battlefield before agreeing to any long-term truce, Peskov stated in an interview. And now, is it the Oreshnik again, writes Yuri Podolyaka. Russia has closed the airspace over Kapustin Yar. That's exactly where they launched the Oreshnik last time, from 6 a.m. on May 12th to 6 a.m. on May 13th. Bad rumors are swirling around Kyiv, as the Legitimny channel adds. Our Kremlin source reports that Zelensky has managed to anger Putin. The Americans were warned. That's why they issued a warning yesterday that Ukraine could face a massive strike. Oreshnik is likely to be launched again, especially if backroom negotiations fail. We previously reported that the Kremlin was preparing to strike in May-June, and we noted that Zelensky raised the stakes with his provocation ahead of May 9th. Let me remind you, Putin had warned, if Kyiv launches a massive raid on Russia, the response will be harsh. Decision-making centers and key targets will be hit. Now the only question is, if a strike comes, where will it land? And will the Kremlin announce the targets for Oreshnik As was discussed back in 2024, our source says one of the most likely targets could be the PGS, underground gas storage facility. That's the version currently circulating behind closed doors. Just think, there's not much gas in there right now. The underground gas storage facility is protected by the best Western air defense systems and is located right near the western border. This could become a vivid demonstration, the very kind of duel Putin spoke about. If it's hit, the explosion would be phenomenal, and the consequences devastating. Billions of dollars in damage and a major blow to the budget. Europe would instantly become vulnerable to gas supply disruptions. This would likely force the EU to urgently sell Nord Stream to American partners, who would quickly repair it and reach an agreement with Russia to resume gas deliveries to Europe. In doing so, they would effectively place Europe, especially Germany, back on a hook. So if the war continues to escalate, it's just a matter of time before the UGS is targeted. We're watching closely and hoping for peace, writes the Legitimny Telegram channel. The arrival of leading globalist players in Kyiv is a clear signal. They intend to prolong the confrontation and derail Trump's peace plan. That's why the media is now pushing the narrative that their visit was meant to discuss a 30-day ceasefire. That's a lie. The real reason for their visit is something else entirely, according to Legitimny. Everyone understands, even if a ceasefire is agreed upon, it will be poorly implemented. The negotiation process will drag on, and the Ukrainian forces will gain 2 or 3 months to amass manpower and drones to launch attacks in the fall. Breaking the ceasefire will be easy. Any provocation will do. The globalists will betray the Kremlin at the first opportunity, just like before. Now the Kremlin is being threatened. If it rejects the ceasefire, the US and EU could impose tougher sanctions. But experts agree, these threats don't carry the same weight they did in 2022. In fact, if the West moves forward with final rounds of sanctions, it will only strengthen the China-Russia alliance, something Washington and the globalists definitely don't want. One more point, Europe and Ukraine are expected to become even more dependent on Russian gas this year. So all these threats are mostly bluff, negotiation pressure tactics. As for Trump's peace plan, there are 2 major issues. First, the key element, elections in Ukraine, has already been quietly removed from the agenda by Trump himself. Second, the globalists are likely to drag the negotiations out endlessly. If the talks collapse after this so-called tactical ceasefire, Trump will be forced to share responsibility with them. Third, and perhaps most important, it's hard to imagine Putin agreeing to a ceasefire offered in such terms. The globalists know this perfectly well, which is why they're ramping up the pressure. Peskov continues to tread carefully. He doesn't say no, but that doesn't mean Moscow will accept. The secret Chancellery Telegram channel offers an interesting take. If a ceasefire happens at all, it will be on Russia's terms and enforced during negotiations with Witkoff. A ceasefire on Moscow's terms shifts the narrative entirely. It shows that Russia isn't blocking peace talks, but rather creating an opening for them. From a military perspective, freezing the front line would lock in Russia's favorable positions. From an information war standpoint, it flips the blame. Now Kyiv and the West would bear moral responsibility for continuing the conflict. And here's the key. This ceasefire wouldn't mark the end of the campaign. It would simply be a new phase, a tool for leverage. If Kyiv refuses, Russia still benefits. Moscow would have shown a willingness to de-escalate and would have the moral and political high ground to resume operations in response to Western sabotage. Plus, a well-structured ceasefire could include monitoring mechanisms and serve as a stepping stone toward a one-on-one summit between Putin and Trump.